Kia ora everyone, and welcome back to this little series on how to write your connections report. In this video I'll be explaining how to write the paragraphs and what they are made up of. This is likely to be rather dense, so take a little bit of time to watch it, and also be prepared to pause the slides and have a read of what's on the screen and have a closer look at it. Okay, so writing your paragraphs. Essentially what we are looking for is a topic sentence kind of introducing the element of the connection or the sub-connection that you're looking at. That is then followed by an exploration of the first text. And so you'll be looking at techniques used. You'll label and unpack those techniques, so name them. And unpacking means explaining how they work. And then you will link those to the purpose, so to the sub-connection, that is, okay? You will do the exact same thing for the second text, so exploring the second text, the techniques used in the second text, label them, unpacking them, and then linking them to the same sub-connection. And then you're making some perceptive judgments about both of the texts together under the sub-connection. And so this is important. What have you learned about human behavior or motivations or relationships across those two texts, or a time period that you've been looking at, or a genre? And so in this part it's really important to say something about why we should bother to look at these texts in this way. So why does it matter, or why does it offer some advantages or insight into the particular texts when we look at them in this connected way. Okay, so there'll be quite a lot of text on the screen in a minute, so I'll just go through those steps. First of all, when you're thinking about your paragraphs, consider to put them in sections. You will see in a minute that there's lots and lots of text going to be on the screen, and so you might want to start off with a topic sentence in the exploration of the first text, and then explore the second text, and then add your conclusion in a separate paragraph, depending on how much you're writing. It's really painful when we're marking and we've got a paragraph that is a whole A4 page long. So go easy on your marker, who will be the reader of this, and give them a couple of paragraphs so that they can kind of see where you've broken up the ideas. Anyway, going ahead, so topic sentence introducing the element of the connection or the sub-connection you are looking at. So in this case, this is what I have to say. When exploring texts that are concerned with what it means to be a New Zealander, see how I've put in my main connection here, the overarching or the umbrella connection, we have to take into account director Taika Waititi, whose works have contributed to our understanding of ourselves. In both Boy and Whale Rider, Waititi and Karo illustrate some of the key struggles of growing up within rural Māori communities. Their portrayal shows that this experience often goes hand in hand with children having to overcome some kind of abuse. So in bold you can see the sub-connection that we're looking at here, and I've introduced Boy and Whale Rider and the two directors who are linked with those two texts. I've also made a comment about Taika Waititi, who, if you remember, I will use in the second paragraph as well. And so I'm like literally just introducing again those two texts, but clearly linked to that sub-connection. Now, if I explore the text in detail, this is what it looks like, and you can see that I have already kind of distinguished the font here a little bit. So we've got that in bold, the unpacking underlined, and then the link to the purpose, or the link to the purpose in sort of italics, and then the sub-connection highlighted again as well. So I'll go through those. So this is what that would look like. In Boy, viewers see this kind of abuse in the rural community presented as neglect. Boy, the 12-year-old protagonist, lives with his grandmother. When she leaves to attend a tangi in Wellington, Boy is left in charge of the house and his brother and 4 cousins. Boy's father, Alamein, has been absent for years but returns in this time, not as one might expect to see his sons, but to find a significant amount of money that he buried in one of the paddocks. In one scene, Waititi, who also plays Alamein in the film, uses dialogue, silence and diegetic sound to show the disconnect between father and son. Boy, who looks up to his father and is pleased that he is home, enters the garage and addresses Alamein using the word dad. Alamein responds saying, "Can you stop calling me dad?" This is followed by silence between them and diegetic sound of nature to support the awkwardness between the two characters. Waititi also uses cross-cutting between the characters to show the viewer their respective reactions. The facial expressions, dialogue, and silence demonstrate how uncomfortable Elamein is with the responsibility that the word dad carries, and how disappointed Boy is at the renewed loss of his dad. With the rejection of the name or label dad, Elamein rejects the role and responsibility, but also the anchor and rock that he could be for both Boy and his younger brother Rocky, whose mother died during Rocky's birth. The audience is positioned to experience this exchange between the characters from both perspectives. With that, Waititi creates room for both sides of the abuse or neglect story. While viewers feel for Boy, they also understand that the situation is more complex and that Elamein faces his own struggles, and that his own struggles that disable him from being able to live his father role. In many ways, Boy is more mature than his father Elamein, because he has learned to take responsibility for his actions, and he has also learned to look after his younger and more vulnerable cousins. Full stop at the end of that. So, as you can see, when I put all of this together, I've got to have a really good knowledge of the text, and so that means I need to be familiar with the places of the text, at least, that I'm talking about. So you might have to read and reread, or watch and rewatch bits of the text that you're talking about. In bold, I have got the techniques that have been used to create a particular effect. So you can see that there's a number of techniques that I've put in here. So dialogue, silence, diegetic sound. Then I'm unpacking the word dad here, and then also I mentioned cross-cutting, and so those are all the labels of the techniques used. Then I am unpacking them, so I explain why those techniques have been used and how they work together. Okay, so they are used to establish a sense of awkwardness, also to give us the facial expressions, again showing how uncomfortable Elamein is and how disappointed Boy is, so that contrast, but also that sort of bigger picture, the responsibility role that Elamein does not take, which I have to talk about because the story that I'm talking about here is one of neglect. And so I made that really clear in one of, like in a bit of my introduction, that neglect plays a key role in that sort of abuse story. And then what you can see down here in italics is a really clear discussion of how the audience is positioned. So what impact does this text have on the audience? How did the director do that? So I mentioned the director's name as well here, and talking about how he actively creates a particular environment. And then highlighted in yellow is my connection to my or my link to my sub connection. So I'm going back to that sub connection here, the key struggles of growing up within rural Māori communities, and then linking that to both sides of the abuse or neglect story, and then making some more sort of insightful observations about the characters and their relationship. So you can see that this is really quite dense and got a lot of work that you've got to do. You would do that to about this amount for one of the texts. As you're carrying on through your paragraph, you would then do the same thing for the second text. So you do the exact same discussion that we had on the previous slide in blue, that sort of level of analysis and discussion for the second text. So again, you're naming techniques, you're labeling those, you're unpacking them, and then you're linking them to the sub-connection. I haven't done this in that example. You would. That's a separate analysis of that text. Now, what's really important is how that bit of analysis comes together in your discussion at the end of that paragraph. So that's where you're discussing that connection. And so those have to be perceptive judgment statements about both texts, and that's really important. It's got to be about both texts. You can't just look at them individually. You've just done that, looked at them individually, and now is the time to look at them together and under that connection. So what have you learned about human behavior and motivations and relationships? And also, again, why bother looking at these texts in this way? Note that it is useful to make a link to the overall connection and the sub-connections. Okay, so here is the example. In both Boy and Whale Rider, viewers are exposed to a portrayal of New Zealand lives. Both these films focus on Māori experiences. This is a perspective that is underrepresented in mainstream media, and these films perhaps offer an opportunity to show a different version of what it means to be a New Zealander. So you can see I'm making a link here to my overall connection, in bold. That's my overall connection. Waititi and Karu explore similar stories, emphasizing the connection people in rural areas have with the land, but also stressing the challenges particularly children in these rural Māori communities face. The purpose of both directors in these films is to convey some of the realities experienced by some New Zealanders in some areas of the country. Viewers are prompted to reflect on their own experiences and compare these to the experiences of other New Zealanders. To Pākehā viewers, these films likely highlight an inequality and their own privilege that they perhaps are more comfortable ignoring most of the time. Particularly, the explicit portrayal of abuse and neglect can be confronting. Both films on the big screen help reflect elements of New Zealand culture. It is perhaps more interesting to consider why it is only stories of Māori trauma that make it to the big screen. These stories, while a lived reality for some, reinforce stereotypes and silent success stories. The public discussion perhaps needs to move on to include questions around which kinds of stories about Māori get funded and which ones don't. This, of course, would start a much bigger discussion about the extent of systemic racism in New Zealand. While this would certainly be uncomfortable, it is a discussion we might need to have if we want to truly understand what it means to be a New Zealander. So, a couple of points to mention here. So first of all, I've got my titles in here and I've got those in italics. I've got my directors here, and I have to discuss the directors or the creators of the text in this bit of the paragraph because I'm looking at the text together. I've got my overarching connection and then I've got my sub-connection here, so that's underlined, and then that portrayal of abuse and neglect, and that both films help reflect elements of New Zealand culture. Now, what I've also done is I've gone beyond those two texts, and I have started a discussion here of what the effect is of having those films on the big screen and what that does to the audience. And so I'm having an explicit discussion here about Pākehā viewers, so I'm commenting on those and what perhaps their experience is of watching these films, and having that inequality presented so clearly to them, but also what kind of thoughts that might leave those viewers with. So how do they walk out of the theatre, or how do they get up off the couch once they've watched those films? What do they think about? And so here again I'm discussing what's the value of looking at these films under that sub-connection. What's the experience for the viewers? So lots and lots of opportunity for you in this last part of the paragraph to really get your teeth into it and explore the ideas and those connections, and also to really show off your thinking. So if you're going to do it anywhere, this is the place to do it. Okay, right, so if we just look at this slide, so you might want to pause on this. This is a collection of sentence starters. Some of them I have used in my examples, others I have not used, and so this is probably a good one for you to just look at or have open as you are writing your reports. Okay, brief summary of what to put in your paragraphs. So you want a topic sentence introducing the elements of the connection or the sub-connection that you're looking at. You want to explore the first texts, discussing techniques, label them, unpack the techniques, and then linking them to the purpose or the sub-connection in your case. Exploring the second text, again a discussion of the techniques, label them, unpack them, link them to the sub-connection. And then the fourth bit is where you can show off what you know and you're thinking, so perceptive judgments about the films or the books. So you want to talk about both texts and then discuss what you have learned about human behavior, motivations, perhaps impact on the audience, and what the reasons are for looking at the texts in that way. Right, guys, as always, chat to your teacher if you're unsure. Use them as your mentors and guides through this process. Right, last video on connections is to follow shortly. Take care.